On Wednesday, May 22nd, the Karen Reed murder trial continued with day 16 of testimony. On this day, the jury heard from 4 witnesses. First, they heard the rest of Jennifer McCabe's testimony from cross-examination and redirect. Then they heard from Kerry Roberts for her testimony about the search and discovery of John O'Keefe before hearing from Laura and Marietta Sullivan about the so-called Aruba incident. And here we finally got a good picture of the prosecution's theory on Karen Reed's motive for murder. But was it a big dramatic event that the prosecution hinted it would be, or was it a bit of a nothing burger? Watch until the end and let me know what you think. Let's get into it. Okay, so first up, of course, was the rest of Jennifer McCabe's testimony. And if you remember from day 15, her cross-examination took up the entire half day of Tuesday. And her direct examination on day 14 looked pretty good. I talked about how her testimony really did put points on the board for the prosecution. But on day 15, everything really crumbled in her cross-examination, which was not even finished yet. And so on day 16, the question going into it was, what was there left for Alan Jackson to really dig into on her cross? As it turns out, there was still a lot of Boston tea to spill. Here's what went down. So right out of the gate, defense attorney Alan Jackson revisited Jennifer McCabe's testimony about her hearing Karen Reed state affirmatively, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." Specifically, Jackson wanted to come back to the reason that Jen gave for not talking about Karen's alleged admission.
Ms. McCabe, you'll recall yesterday we talked about the 12 times in your grand jury transcript that you talked about statements that you attributed to my client. You remember that conversation?
Yes.
And in those dozen times, you never used the word or the words or the phrase, "I hit him," correct?
Correct.
And your explanation for that was, well, I wasn't asked that specific question, correct?
Correct.
You were, in fact, on January 29th, let me rephrase that just a little bit. You did, in fact, on January 29th, seek to ask an officer to come back to 34 Fairview for the specific purpose of telling that officer something that you thought was important, correct?
Correct.
Which officer was that?
Michael Lank.
And about what time did you ask Officer Lank to join you back at 34 Fairview?
I'm not sure. I know it was in the AM. I'm just not sure what time exactly.
Somewhere around 9 a.m. Does that sound about right?
Possibly.
Okay, so this literally, we're talking about just a couple of hours after the incident in question.
Correct.
Okay. Sergeant Lank came with Sergeant Gallagher, I believe, correct?
Correct.
Came back to the location at 34 Fairview and gave you an opportunity to provide whatever information you deemed relevant at that time to impart to him, correct?
Correct.
And isn't it true that at that time you didn't tell Sergeant Lank that my client said, "I hit him"? What you said was that my client said, "I hope I didn't hit him," correct?
No.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
It's an incident report page. It's like the second to the last or third to the last page. It's Lank's report. Could you take a look at that report, just the face page, and tell me if that appears to be an incident report associated with this case? I know you didn't draft it, but you recognize that that's an incident report from the police, Canton Police specifically.
Yes.
Could you turn to the tab that's the little light blue tab, maybe 3 pages from the end of that report?
Yes.
I'd like you to read that paragraph to yourself, if you wouldn't mind, please. Do you have that in mind?
I do, yes.
Okay, may I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Thank you. What you read just now appears to be a report of the incident in which Sergeant Lank came back to 34 Fairview to give you an opportunity to tell him whatever it was that you thought was important, correct?
Was that a full report, or is that just an excerpt from it,
Well,
that paragraph?
That right there is a full report of that incident of Sergeant Lank going back to 34 Fairview. Would you agree?
Well, that's not a full report of what I said, but if that's his full report, it's his full report.
Okay. And in this report, what he writes that you said to him.
Objection.
The objection is sustained.
Isn't it true that what you actually told Sergeant Lank when he returned is that while driving around with her and Roberts looking for the victim, Miss Reed said something to the effect of, quote, "I hope I didn't hit him," end quote. Isn't that what you told him?
Yes, because she said that when we were driving around.
And then you went on to say that, quote, she, Karen Reed, made these statements again at the scene when the victim was discovered, correct?
Correct.
And then you went on to say, she, Karen Reed, that you thought that Reed may have made these same statements in front of a police officer, but she was not sure, meaning you were not sure, correct?
I was not sure if she made what the police officers may have heard. That report is his recollection. My recollection is I told him that she said, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. And I told him that he should ask the responders if they heard that, because it was a great possibility that they heard it as well.
But none of that, you'll agree, you just read the report, none of that is in his report.
That's a very brief report.
I didn't ask you if it was brief, I asked you if it was in it, correct?
Correct.
And that's a report of a conversation that he had at 34 Fairview with you for the specific purpose of memorializing what you told him, correct?
Correct.
And what you told him, according to Sergeant Lank, is she said one phrase, "I hope I didn't hit him," correct?
That's what's in the report.
All right. And again, this was 2.5, 3 hours after the incident, not 2.5 years later, correct?
Correct.
And so once again, there is another inconsistency in Jen McCabe's testimony, and it's the fault of someone else. It's yet another police interview that she gave where the report says something different than what she testified to. And of course, it's not that Jen is being inconsistent, it's that the officer that made the report was a doofus and failed to write down this very important statement. And so this cross-examination was again off to the races. Now remember how I said that the testimony in a trial can sometimes be a bit of a tennis match. One side makes things look one way, and then the other side reframes with more information. Then the other side gets up again and reframes yet again to change how the jury might see the issue at hand. Well, on this particular topic, ADA Adam Lally later got up on redirect and actually scored a point on the subject. Specifically, he pointed out to testimony that Jen gave in June 2023 on this particular subject. And here, as it turns out, Jen may not have mentioned any of this statement in any of the earlier police interviews, but she did testify about it in another hearing in June 2023.
Ms. McCabe, as I was asking before, in June of 2023, you testified in another proceeding, correct?
Correct.
And you were asked questions specifically about those statements that you heard the defendant say on the morning of January 20th, correct?
Correct.
And do you recall specifically what your testimony was in regard to that portion of your, in regard to those statements?
I don't recall specifics. I know what I know what happened.
Can I approach you?
Yes.
I'm giving you 2 pages. Direct your attention to the bottom of the first page and then into the next page. If you could just review that to yourself and look up what you think.
The page again, Mr. Lally?
You're on 816 and 817.
Thank you.
May I approach you?
Yes.
Mr. McCabe, is your memory refreshed as to what you said in that prior proceeding in regard to those statements?
Yes.
What did you say?
What did I say in that? I told them that Karen looked straight at me and said, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. And I said that there was, I believe, an EMT that overheard as well.
Now, do you recall in that same prior proceeding being asked any questions sort of at different times, the defendant saying different iterations of that same statement?
Objection.
Sustained as to form. No leading, Mr. Lally.
With respect to that that's testimony in that same prior proceeding, what, if anything else, were you asked about statements the defendant made to you that morning?
I was asked what were some of the statements that Miss Reed had made, and it was like, repeat, did I hit him? Could I have hit him? Is he dead? Is he dead? Is he dead? Could I have hit him? Did I hit him? I have a cracked taillight. And then her, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him.
And so with respect to questions and as far as did I hit him or could I have hit him, and the statement I hit him, those were at different times, correct?
Correct.
So I'm going to give credit where credit is due. And this was a good part of Lally's redirect of this witness. However, this was not the last word on the subject. To explain the buildup of Jackson's recross-examination of Jen on this subject, I need to kind of take a step back and mention another thing that happened earlier on the cross-examination. This was another thing that happened early on cross, where Jackson referred to the meeting with Officer Lank's wife, and he asked if Jen had any other at-home visits with any other police officers. Jen responded, I went to the house of Elizabeth Proctor in September 2023. Now, this is a pretty clear verbal distancing technique that she just used. Because what she really meant was, I went to the home of Trooper Michael Proctor and his wife Elizabeth Proctor, and as we all know, Trooper Michael Proctor is the lead investigator of this case. It also later came out that she had a bunch of phone calls with Trooper Michael Proctor to his personal cell phone. But anyway, when Jackson asked why in the world she visited the Proctor house, Jennifer McCabe decided to make a very impassioned statement, turning to speak directly to the jury about details of harassment that she and Elizabeth Proctor had apparently been going through as a result of this case. And the thing is, there has been a bit of disagreement about whether it was proper or not for Judge Cannone to allow this kind of testimony in, and to the degree that it has come in. In my personal opinion, these statements are entirely improper, especially to the extent to which they've been allowed in, particularly by Jennifer McCabe. And the thing is, Jen has certainly understood the value of this, and she's used it as a tool at every possible opportunity. However, the defense actually was able to Krav Maga this whole harassment issue on day 16. When I say that, I mean that they were able to take a subject that was a vulnerability for the defense and to turn it into a pretty good weapon. This happened on Jackson's recross of Jen. And what Jackson did was he took Jen's heavy use of the subject of harassment and folded it in with Lally's redirect that covered Jen's I hit him testimony in June 2023. Bear with me for a moment and you will see why I think this is an absolutely brilliant showcasing of lawyering by Alan Jackson.
Concerning statement, I hit him. He gave a statement on January 29th to Sergeant Light. Called him over to specifically give him a statement, correct?
Correct.
Gave a statement the next day, later that day, Trooper Proctor, correct?
Correct.
You were also met with, on that following Tuesday, with a trooper named Prince, correct?
Correct.
And then you testified in April of 2022 no fewer than 12 times about statements that you attributed to Ms. Reed, correct?
Correct.
And in not one of those instances, not one, is there a report that says you said, she said, I hit it, correct?
Correct, although I told Mike Lank.
Oh, we already know that the officers all got it wrong.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained as to that. Next question, please, Mr. Jackson.
So you indicate that you were, the harassment that you just described, this terrible harassment that you just described, started in about April 2023, correct?
Correct.
It was around the time that there were public hearings concerning this Google search. Is that right?
Objection.
I'll allow that.
Is that right?
I'm not sure exactly when the Google search came out.
But you do know that you started suffering this harassment that you claimed is awful and terrible, etc., around April of 2023. Is that right?
I didn't claim it's awful. It is awful.
Okay, I'm sure it is awful, Ms. McCabe. I'm sure it's terrible.
It is.
I'm sure it sucks to be harassed.
It really does.
Yeah, I'm sure it does.
Objection, Your Honor.
All right, so that's sustained, and I'll strike it. Go ahead and ask a question, Mr. Jackson.
You were upset by April of 2023 that there was public outrage about your family being involved in the death of John O'Keefe. That's what you were upset about, correct?
I was upset that we as witnesses were being harassed.
You were upset about public outrage concerning this case, correct?
Objection.
Sustained, that was answered. Next question.
And 2 months later, in June of 2023, for the first time, you testified at another proceeding, and lo and behold, you attributed the words, "I hit him," to my client, right?
Objection.
So ask that without the objectionable phrase.
2 months later, at another proceeding, in June of 2023, you attributed the statement, "I hit him," to my client for the first time under oath, correct?
Under oath, correct.
So in other words, Jackson basically said, yeah, okay, so you did testify under oath at a previous hearing about that alleged admission. But that was the first time that you said anything about this officially in any kind of a record. And it looks an awful lot like your motivation for coming forward with that first time testimony under oath about this was because of what had just come out a couple months prior to the public about your Google search about how long to die in the cold. In other words, you were outed publicly by doing something really bad, and you decided to take revenge on my client by lying under oath. Like, this sounds like it's coming right out of Mean Girls, like some literal Regina George burn book crap.
This girl is the nastiest skank bitch I've ever met. Do not trust her. She is a fugly slut. I found it in the girls' bathroom. It's so mean, Mr. Duvall.
Is this true? Trang Pak made out with Coach Carr? Good Lord.
What's that say? Caitlin Cousin is
Fat whore.
Okay, calm down, Miss George.
Why would someone write that? That's just so mean.
Don't worry, we're gonna find out who did it.
There's only 3 girls in the whole school who aren't in it.
Okay, so now we obviously don't know what the jury is thinking about this. But at the very least, when the jury hears anything further in this trial about harassment, particularly as it concerns Jennifer McCabe, they are likely to think about this particular inconsistency and what appears to be Jen's reason for maybe even lying under oath in this case. Like I said, that is brilliant lawyering.
Talented, brilliant, incredible, amazing, show-stopping, spectacular, never the same, totally unique, completely not ever been done before, unafraid to reference or not reference, put it in a blender, shit on it, vomit on it, eat it, give birth to it.
Anyway, now the other part that was referenced in Jackson's re-cross-examination here was the Google search. So let me back up and also refer to this part of Jen's cross-examination here. So remember how on direct examination, she testified that on the morning of January 29th, 2022, around 6 a.m.-ish, Karen asked Jen to Google hypothermia, Google how long to die in the cold. This was an exact phrase that she repeated multiple times throughout her direct examination. Well, on cross-examination, Jackson once again showed some brilliance when he brought in some data from Jen McCabe's cell phone extraction. This told a bit of a different story. Now, to do this, Jackson started by establishing with Jen that on January 29th, 2022, around 2 a.m., when she went to bed, she made some Google searches. These were related to other things not related to hypothermia, like her daughter's hockey league rankings and whatnot. But then Jackson pulled in the extraction results showing multiple Google searches that Jen apparently made on January 29th, 2022, similar to how long to die in the cold. Some of those were in fact around 6:23 a.m., similar to what Jen actually testified to. However, one of them was apparently at 2:27 a.m.
Does this appear to be the document that was just marked as Exhibit 99?
Yes.
I know it's a little bit small, Mr. Bateson. You see this column?
Yes.
Third column from the, actually it's the fourth column from the left. One, some dates, some data, and then a Google search, correct?
Correct.
What does that Google search say?
House long to die in cold.
Now, you indicate that you did that, you made that search at 6:23 a.m., correct?
Correct.
And then you indicated that you did it again thereafter at 6:24, correct?
Correct.
At 6:24, you misspelled the phrase and you spelled it as follows: how long T-I die in C-I-K-D, correct?
Correct.
Now you claim that those two searches were at 6:23 and 6:24 a.m. respectively, correct?
Objection.
Phrase it differently.
Sure. You've indicated under direct examination that these two searches were at 6:23 and 6:24 a.m., right?
I don't know if I gave exact times, but I said it was in the morning and Karen had asked me to do it.
And exactly, you claimed that you searched it because Karen was screaming at you and yelling at you, Google hypothermia, and you Googled how long does it take for a person to die, she said something like how long does it take for a person to die of hypothermia, and you Google searched it at 6:23 and 6:24. Is that right?
Again, I'm not sure about the exact times. I just did it after Karen asked me to do it.
Would you quarrel with the idea that those were about 30 seconds apart?
Okay.
And you're aware, Ms. McCabe, that both misspellings of that phrase result in the exact same search results, don't they?
I'm not aware of that, no.
Well, you Googled them, ma'am. You're looking on your phone and you Googled how long to die in cold and how long to die in CIKD. Both of those. You Googled them, right?
I did, yes.
And they result in the exact same search results, don't they?
I have no idea.
So my question to you is, why the two searches?
She was standing next to me screaming, shaking my hand. My hand was cold. I was trying to Google it. Obviously, maybe whatever came up first didn't make sense because I had some misspellings, so I did it again.
So Hoslong to die in cold results in articles concerning dying of exposure, doesn't it?
We never got the chance to read it.
Well, you're the one, when you say we, who's we?
Karen and myself.
Well, you're the one holding the phone, Ms. McCabe.
Correct.
So you're looking down at your phone and you see exactly what comes up, correct?
I don't remember exactly what came up.
Well, what came up was something about dying of hypothermia, didn't it?
That's what she asked.
So why do it again? Why do it again, Ms. McCabe? You had the result. Why the second search?
I cannot answer that beyond telling you that my hands were frozen, she was shaking me and screaming at me.
And you see the time, let me scroll up, please. According to the Celebrate data, you see this first search that says Hoslong to die in cold?
I do.
What's that time?
You've got the, it's right over at 2:27
AM or PM?
a.m.
Ms. McCabe, you made that search at 2:27 a.m. because you knew that John O'Keefe was outside in your sister's lawn dying in the cold, didn't you?
Absolutely not. I did not make that search at that time. No.
Realized the next morning, after John was discovered, after 6 a.m., that you had an incriminating search on your phone, didn't you?
Absolutely not.
To cover your tracks, you searched it again in order to overwrite the original search at 2:27, correct?
Again, absolutely not.
But you were nervous and you screwed it up. So the first search you made at 6:23 was Hus long to die in CIKD, wasn't it?
No.
When you see the search right there, correct?
I see the search, but I disagree with your narrative.
And what's the time frame of that search?
6:23.
And you agree that that time frame is accurate, right?
Again, it's what the report says.
And that comports with your memory of that morning, about 6:23 in the morning in 51 seconds.
Correct.
There's a second search, correct?
Correct.
And this one, at 6:24, it says Hus long to die in cold. 6:24:16, correct?
Correct.
I'm sorry, 18. I was not that great. And that comports with your memory as well.
I remember Googling it at the request of the defendant. Yes.
About 27 seconds apart, correct?
Yes.
But the reality is, your first search didn't comport with the 2:27 a.m. search, did it? It was a different spelling, wasn't it?
I never searched a 227. That is not reality.
But the 6:24 search did exactly mirror the search that, according to this report, took place at 2:27, correct?
I'm sure Celebrite will be able to explain it to you. I can't.
And then, of those three searches, one of them ended up deleted. Isn't that right?
I never deleted any search.
Take a look at the Celebrite report, top search, and the column marked deleted. What do you see?
I see a yes.
Who did this now? Ms. McCabe, the reason you deleted that 2:27 a.m. call is because you realized that if you were caught Googling how long it takes for a person to die in the cold 3.5 hours before John's body was found, that would incriminate you, wouldn't it?
Objection.
The objection sustained.
Did you delete that search because you knew that you would be implicated in John O'Keefe's death if that search was found on your phone?
Objection.
Could you answer that, please?
I did not delete that search. I never made that search at 2:23. I never would have left John O'Keefe out in the cold to die because he was my friend that I loved.
But he's not your family, is he?
Family and friends.
Is he
Objection.
not your...
Sustained.
You acknowledge that you made the search at 6:23, don't you?
In the morning I did, yes.
Acknowledge that you made the search at 6:24.
Multiple times in the morning, yes.
Of the three searches that show up that were all found on your phone, the one that you disavow is the one that took place at 2:27 a.m., which would implicate you and exonerate my client, correct?
Objection.
Sustained. Can I ask it differently, Mr. Jackson?
Of those three searches, there was only one marked deleted. Isn't that right?
Correct.
That was the one at 2:27 a.m., correct?
I wouldn't even know how to go in and delete a search.
That's not what I asked you. The one according to the Celebrite report that was deleted, the one at 2:27 a.m., correct?
Correct.
This was a brilliant cross-examination. Remember that going into her cross, Jennifer McCabe seemed to me like the prosecution's strongest witness. But by the end of her cross-examination, she looked like the true villain of this whole story. Now, as always, opinions can always differ, and you might have a different one than I do. Jurors might also see things completely differently than I do. But to me, I don't see how it's possible for anyone to see her as a credible witness after this. And what's more, this is the most damning evidence yet that supports the defense's theory that Karen Read was framed by this group of people. Now, one more thing about Jen McCabe before we move on. I already talked about some good work that Lally had on Jen's redirect. However, there was a part that I just did not understand what he was doing and why. Remember how on day 15, Jen testified that she overheard Kerry Roberts say something in a police phone interview that Jen called shocking and horrifying. And Jen testified that in response to hearing this, she texted the family group chat, she's telling them everything. Well, on redirect, Lally asked Jen what it was that Kerry had said over the phone. Here's what Jen said she heard Kerry say.
Now, during that time, you had indicated that you had heard a statement that you said was horrified you in some way. Is that correct?
From Miss Roberts?
Yes.
Correct.
And what was that? What was she talking about?
Objection.
The door has been opened, Mr. Jackson. That means you can answer.
Okay. So basically, Kerry is a talker, and once she started...
I think just focus on
Okay.
what she said.
Okay. She said something like, John really loved Amy, and in my eyes, Karen was just a babysitter with benefits.
And is that what made it memorable to you as far as what had transpired at that time?
Yes.
Again, I don't understand why the prosecution volunteered this information to the jury. To me, this doesn't show anything about Karen's mental state or motive. It doesn't show anything bad about her at all. All this shows is that the people around Karen and John had catty opinions about Karen. And to me, it makes Jen and Kerry look bad. Anyway, that was Jen McCabe. The next witness was Kerry Roberts, the other woman who joined Karen Read on the search to find John on the morning of January 29th, 2022. What was most interesting about her testimony was that after everything that we had heard about Kerry Roberts from Jennifer McCabe, there was a bit of a cloud over Kerry's testimony. There were the statements about Kerry being a talker, so to speak, and then making that disparaging comment about Karen. But the thing is, during her direct examination, she didn't come across as catty to me or even a talker. Oddly enough, though, she did actually use the same exact phrase that Jen did to describe Kerry, a talker.
And so when you got to your daughter's friend's house, who, if anyone, did you speak with?
Mike's wife came out to the car to see how I was and how the O'Keefes were, and so she talked to us for a little, just asking how everyone was.
And if you know, ma'am, do you know about how long that conversation was?
I mean, I'm a talker, so it's probably a while. I'd say at least 45 minutes.
And the thing is, when there is an open allegation that these two witnesses have lined up their testimony, noticeable repetition of these kinds of phrases between them isn't really a good thing. However, I will say that other than that, Kerry did come across as a credible and sympathetic witness to me. She seemed like she's finally a witness who was a friend of John's that genuinely did care about him. She was straightforward and gave simple answers to the questions being asked. And one thing that she did testify about that could be damaging to the defense was that on January 29th, 2022, at about 5 a.m., Kerry says that she received a phone call from Karen. And when Kerry picked up, Karen apparently said, "John's dead, Kerry, Kerry, Kerry." And then she basically hung up. Then apparently Karen called back and said something like, "I'm concerned that he's dead. I think he's been hit by a snowplow. I wasn't supposed to stay in Canton last night. He didn't come home, and it's not like him to leave Kaylee at home alone at night." Now, the reason I say it might be damaging to the defense is because people can disagree on what exactly it means that Karen, at that hour before actually finding John, concluded that John was dead. But anyway, next, Karen apparently told Kerry, "We drank so much last night that I don't remember what happened." This is the first bit of testimony that actually kind of supports the DUI charge for the prosecution. However, it doesn't give any sort of a timing as to when it was that she drank. And as a reminder, this is in the midst of all kinds of statements that Karen made that morning, many of which don't seem to be connected to reality. Anyway, then apparently Karen asked to come over to Kerry's house so that they could take Kerry's car to look for John. While waiting, Kerry said that she called the Canton non-emergency line and the Good Samaritan Hospital to see if they had any reports of anyone injured by a snowplow accident or by a car accident. She said that they told her there was nothing, at least nothing about John. Now, this is one of the things that makes me think that she's a credible witness in her testimony. This is something that is in fact verifiable by phone records. And that does seem like the sort of thing that is a reasonable thing to do when you are a friend who is being clear-headed about a situation like a crisis like this. And we also know from previous testimony that Kerry handed over her phone early on so the police could do a phone extraction. Anyway, after a while of waiting for Karen, Kerry said that she learned that Karen had instead gone to the McCabe house, so she eventually went that way to catch up with the two of them. When Kerry found Karen, she said that Karen was on the phone with Jen through her car speakers and that she could hear the conversation. So Kerry apparently heard Karen tell Jen that she had left John at the Waterfall Bar and Grill the night before. Then Kerry said that she heard Jen respond, "No, I saw you at my sister's house." Karen then responded something to the effect of, "But then what about my taillight?" Kerry testified that it did have a crack showing a little black hole, although she said she could see that it had snow caked over it. Another thing that was interesting about this point is that Kerry testified that the taillight also had a metal piece that was sticking out of it. Anyway, then they went to John's house, and Kerry basically noticed the same things that Jen did in her direct examination. After that, they headed towards 34 Fairview Road. On the way, apparently Bella's mom's name came up in the car, and Kerry testified that Karen said something like, "Bella's mom never liked me." And then they brought up another ex-girlfriend of John's, and Karen was like, "Could he be there?" Kerry testified that Karen was in the back seat and kept sort of popping back and forth between the back seat and in between the two front seats, and kind of in like this erratic sort of way. Then all of a sudden, Karen apparently spotted John and started kicking and screaming to be let out. Kerry testified, however, that when she looked over, she couldn't see where he was. But then she said that she identified a mound, and that's where she figured out that John was. I will say, this is an interesting description. Remember how I've been talking about these snow levels as a potential timeline tool? And fair enough, Kerry did testify that he was under quite a bit of snow, about 3 to 4 inches, she said, which was why she couldn't really see him at first. And she also testified that when he was ultimately lifted, she said that she saw grass underneath him. So this could suggest an earlier time frame than what it first appeared based on what the first responders testified to. Now, in addition to this, Kerry also testified about Karen's behavior at the scene. Karen was trying to give John mouth to mouth while Kerry did chest compressions. But Karen apparently also was getting up and running around erratically, maybe at various intervals or at some point in time. Then at some point in the morning, Karen grabbed Kerry's jacket and screamed things like, "Is he alive?" And Kerry testified that she responded that the paramedics were working on him and that they wouldn't be working on him if he were dead. Basically, she was just trying to calm Karen down. Then Kerry testified about the same kind of thing that Jen did about Karen having blood on her hands and asking, did she start her period? To which Kerry also said, no, that's not what's happening here. Now, Kerry also testified about John's injuries. She said that he had scratches on his right arm, a gash in the back of his head that she saw because she tried wrapping it in warm blankets to warm him up, blood coming out of his nose and mouth, and a very swollen black right eye. She later testified that when she took John's parents to the hospital to see him, they also invited her in to see him basically one last time. And she said that at that point, he looked even worse. Then he had 2 black eyes and everything basically just looked worse. So this was the end of her direct examination. I really thought that there were going to be some points that the defense team would want to go over. But to my surprise, they stood up and said, "No cross, Your Honor." So there you go. That was all the testimony of Kerry Roberts. Okay, so the last 2 witnesses of the day I'm going to talk about together because they give 2 slightly different perspectives of basically the same event. This was the Aruba incident, which we've heard a little bit about before day 16. Now, before I get into the details of the testimony of these 2 witnesses, let's review what the jury knew about the Aruba incident going into day 16. So all the way back on day 1, we heard from Paul and Aaron O'Keefe, John's brother and sister-in-law. And they testified about a number of things, one of those being an incident that happened in Aruba around New Year's Day 2022, so earlier in that same month that John died. Paul and Aaron were in Aruba at the same time as Karen and John, but essentially on the opposite side of the island. So what they could testify to about the incident actually was really limited. Essentially, Aaron testified that she had gotten a series of text messages from Karen saying something along the lines of John having kissed the sister of a friend of his. And the reason why we were able to learn all of this is basically for the purposes of determining Karen's state of mind. In other words, was this something that could have driven Karen to murder John O'Keefe? Now, as you can imagine, jealousy can be a very powerful motive for murder. And in cases where a romantic partner or even a perceived romantic partner has been killed, this is something that comes up a lot. But that was basically all we got in terms of the details from Paul and Aaron Sullivan on this specific point. So the question since day one has been what actually happened here. It's kind of been this big mystery, and it led to the question, were John and Karen really in this rough spot in their relationship by the time they got to the end of the same month on January 28th, 2022? Now, the prosecution is alleging that John was basically getting ready to leave Karen. So is that true? And did she know that he was maybe about to leave her? And was that something that basically made her snap? Like, if I can't have him, no one can. So that's all to set the stage for Laura and Marietta Sullivan's testimony. As a way of background, Laura testified that she was a really close friend of John's for a long time. She had been pregnant and dating her son's father when he apparently took his own life, and John stepped forward to be a significant presence in their life. Although they were close before, he was essentially there for her when she needed someone the most. And so they developed this close bond where she named him her son's godfather, and he became really close with the whole family over the time that followed. One of those people that he also got to know very well during this time was Laura's sister, Marietta. Marietta is something like 10 years younger than Laura, and she testified that over the years, she thought of John as like a big brother. She also testified that she really admired John for the way that he came to the aid of his sister when she needed it most. Okay, so then fast forward to Aruba around New Year's 2022. Random side note, throughout this trial, I've been having the hardest time remembering Aruba as opposed to Bermuda over this incident. For some reason, it's like my brain has kept wanting me to remember this story as the Bermuda incident as opposed to the Aruba incident. I don't know why, but that seems to be, I guess, a personal problem. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So Laura testified that every year she had a bunch of people plan this trip together to Aruba. It's like a timeshare kind of thing where a bunch of people buy time slots together to get hotels together, and they just spend a bunch of time warming up in the winter around December and January. So around New Year's 2022, John joined this group of like 60 people along with Karen and his niece and nephew. And for Karen, this was her first time meeting Laura and Marietta, if not everyone else who was there. There was a bit where Laura testified about how Karen really wanted to get 2 rooms as opposed to 1, and that she wanted to have her own bathroom. I think the prosecution wanted to bring this in to make the jury think that Karen is high maintenance or wealthy or some combination of the two. But as I looked at it, this seemed like a situation where she's like, I like my space, I can afford it, and these kids coming with us are teens or preteens, and they also probably want their space too, so why not? Anyway, Laura also testified that on one of the first nights, a big group went out to dinner. And at the end of the dinner, when they asked for the check, the waiter told them that Karen had surreptitiously paid for the bill already. Everyone apparently protested that they wanted to pay for their part of the meal, you know, as is generally polite and proper. But she basically responded like, no, it's my pleasure, and I'm just honored to be able to be present with all of you. Honestly, I'm not sure why the prosecution brought this in. Maybe it was to show again that Karen is wealthy. And maybe they wanted the jury to think that Karen is basically using her wealth to pretty much buy her way into the good graces of other people, or that she was flashing her wealth in front of all of these people to try to one-up them or make them jealous of her wealth. But something that people have to keep in mind is a party's wealth can be a turnoff to a juror, particularly if they come from a different socioeconomic bracket. There's no doubt about that. But it's not necessarily a given that there is going to be this turnoff. Sometimes evidence showing the way in which a party uses their wealth can make a huge difference in how the jury looks at them. And examples of the defendant's big generosity to the people around her is something that makes me think she's not money hungry. When she has it, she seems to like to share it. If anything, this shows generosity, grace, and a certain certain degree of understanding that it's kind of on her to get into the good graces of the people who have been important in John's life for a long time and not the other way around. It's the opposite of entitlement, essentially. Anyway, Marietta Sullivan, the last witness of the day, arrived a bit later in Aruba around December 30th. And on that day, both Laura and Marietta had testified that John's only thing that he wanted to do that day was to sit at the pool bar and watch the Alabama football game. So apparently he was sitting for quite a few hours, drinking and watching the game. Since Marietta had basically just arrived, it sounds like this was the first time that she had seen John in Aruba. So she said that she was getting off of the elevator on the ground floor. When she stepped out, she saw John, who had just come inside and was pretty visibly sloppily drunk. When Marietta saw him, she said that she hugged him and said, "Hey, Godfather," since that was apparently the family's nickname for him, and noticed that he was really glassy-eyed and kind of like searching the room for something. He then kind of pointed down the hallway to some rooms and was very drunkenly like, "I need to go that way." So she was like, "Okay, see you later." And apparently he stumbled down the hall towards his room. And then she testified that the next thing that she knew, she heard a woman scream, "Who the F was that?" And again, as I've said before elsewhere in this trial, Marietta used the full word, but because it's not really necessary here, I'm self-censoring for the YouTube algorithm. And so what it turns out is Karen thought that John and Marietta had kissed, although they apparently just hugged. When John responded something like, "Oh, that's just Laura's little sister," Marietta said that she walked up to kind of confront Karen by introducing herself directly to her. Karen apparently responded something like "F you," and Marietta shot back with something similar like an "F you too," and then just turned and walked out. Marietta said that she saw her sister Laura outside and told them like, "Karen sucks." Now, Laura testified that she saw John maybe the next day, and he was really down. And she said that that was how she found out from him what Karen had alleged about this whole cheating accusation. Sometime later, like a matter of days, John and Karen and the kids were set to leave to go back to Massachusetts. And Laura testified that Karen went and found Laura to say goodbye and to apologize how she was with Marietta. According to Laura's testimony, Karen was like, "I'm sorry, I thought I saw something that I didn't really see, and I want to make it up to your sister by paying for at least part of her room." Laura apparently told her that's not necessary, but an apology directly to my sister will probably do. And then John also went up to Laura and thanked her for the trip. He basically said it was like the best trip that he had been on in a while, and that things ended on a great note despite the earlier things that had happened. Now, Marietta testified that at the end of it, she personally never heard from John on the way out, which was unusual. And she said that she never heard from Karen after that first meeting where they exchanged their harsh words. So apparently Karen never did apologize directly to Marietta, but apparently Karen did pay for part of the room. Okay, so here's the thing about this whole story. Remember that in the day one recap, I talked about how in the beginning, both sides are setting expectations for the jury, and by the end, the jury is going to decide whether certain expectations were met or not. So if something sounds like there's going to be some kind of damning evidence that comes out, and then the jury sees the evidence and they realize it's really not as bad as you said it was going to be, that's something that can end up harming that side that made that promise in the first place. Now, for the prosecution, this Aruba incident was a story that was set up as an expectation. Like, just wait until you hear the details of this incident. Like, when you hear it, you're going to be convinced that Karen had a strong motive to kill John because they were on the verge of breaking up because of this. But by the end of day 16, we finished hearing from these two sisters, and I'm just like, that's it? It sounds like this was a fight that happened between Karen and John, yes. But this was within the relatively normal realm of fights that happen between couples. It sounds to me that Karen has or had some insecurities about being cheated on, or maybe being left behind by John. And maybe part of that stemmed from the fact that John seemed to have some very close, meaningful friendships with some women that had lasted a long time. That can be intimidating for a woman in a relationship. And it might require the couple to navigate what's okay and what's not okay, and for both of them to be able to continue to get what they need from the relationship. So this all sounds like Karen's insecurities basically got the best of her in this moment, and she totally freaked out. But it also sounds like, although yes, she probably was wrong in this situation and they got into a big fight about it and they talked it through, and then she realized that she was the one who was being unreasonable, and then they resolved it. The reason I say this about the resolution piece is that it's one thing to apologize to your partner for causing harm. That requires a person to check their ego, of course. But to be willing to go outside of the relationship and extend the apology further to someone that you really don't even know, that really requires someone to have accepted that they were wrong and to really take a slice of humble pie. Now, would it have been better if she had apologized to Marietta directly? Of course. And from Marietta's tone on the stand, it sounds like she actually is still pretty sour about the whole incident, and particularly having been accused so wantonly of being a homewrecker. And I really don't fault her for that. If I were her, I'm certain that I would have wanted to have an apology directly from the accuser. But Karen's offered to pay for at least part of the room charge, and that she apparently did pay for that part of the cost is another way that she did show some penance. And it's still not nothing that she also went up to Laura to apologize to her personally. So at the end of this story, it feels resolved. It feels like there was something that happened, a big thing that happened, but that Karen and John resolved it and moved on. Unless there is some kind of evidence that the prosecution is about to introduce that suggests that this controversy wasn't really resolved and that it festered over the next few weeks until John's death, I don't see how this was a big enough incident to become a motive for murder. Because if you've been in a long-term relationship long enough, you probably have gone through some sort of a big fight with your significant other that was, in fact, a flare-up of some insecurity by one or both of you. Even if that relationship didn't last, maybe that was the thing that actually ended the relationship. How believable is it that that's the thing that leads to murder? To me, in this situation, it just doesn't fit. But as I always say, I'm just one person. And this jury is made up of 12 people. So tell me what you think about this. Do you agree or disagree on where this whole story ended? Let us know in the comments down below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this, or at least found it interesting or informative. And if you did, I would love it if you could hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you're new here and you want to see more daily coverage of the Karen Read trial, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next video or live stream is up. See you for day 17.